Quorum present.
Your quorum getting
Okay.
present. This is the most people
That's
we've
the
had
most
in a board
yes.
meeting ever.
7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, one time.
Right? 2. Yeah.
Good afternoon. With quorum present, the Maricopa Regional Continuum of Care Board meeting is now called to order. Please turn on your microphone when speaking and mute when not speaking. The MAG public comment process allows members of the public to comment on items on today's agenda or on items that fall under the COC's jurisdiction. If you would like to comment at today's meeting, please fill out a white request to speak card located at the information table and give it to the MAG staff. If you parked in the garage, parking validators are available on the information table. If you purchased a transit ticket to come to the meeting, please see staff for a ticket. Hearing assisted devices are available from MAG staff. Katie, would you please take roll call? Members of the board, please say you are here and your organization after Katie calls your name.
I'm also going to add, can you please say how long you've been on the board? Because we have new folks here. So do a little intro. Jacqueline Campbell.
Jacqueline Campbell, U.S. Vets, approximately 1 year.
Thank you. Jessica Cruz.
Here, and my first meeting.
And what organization are you?
Native American Connections.
Thank you. Liz DaCosta.
Yes, Liz DaCosta with Access, and this is day 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa Glow.
Lisa Glow with Cass, I think about a year.
Thank you. Chris Hallett.
City of Peoria, about 1.5 years, almost 2 years maybe.
Michael Hughes.
Here, shorter than Jacqueline. I think about 6 months.
And who are you with?
Oh, a new leaf.
Thank you. Natalie Lewis. Natalie's just walking in. She's with City of Mesa and has been on the board about 6 months also. I'm gonna go with that. Rachel Vilney.
Here, City of Phoenix, and also 6 months.
Thank you. Sean Pierce.
Sean Pierce, Maricopa County, 6 months.
Thank you. Charles Sullivan.
Charles Sullivan, ABC Housing. 3 years or something.
Sure. Cricket Weatherington.
Arizona Housing Inc. Had to think for a second. Today's my first day.
Welcome. Danielle Wright. Co-chair Vicki Phillips.
Vicki Phillips here, Community Bridges, in approximately 6 months.
Thank you. And with that, Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is a call to the audience. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under the Continuum of Care Board that are not on the agenda or that are on the agenda for discussion and not for action. 15 minutes will be provided for the call to the audience agenda item unless the committee requests an exception to this limit. Katie, were there any comments received or anyone who wishes to offer comments at this time?
Co-chair Phillips, we had one comment received from Jessica Cruz with Native American Connections. Starting comment now. Last week, Governor Hobbs released a statement during a press conference informing the public of Arizona Medicaid fraud. Governor Hobbs announced action against 100 providers of behavioral health, residential, and outpatient treatment services. Local and federal officials have credible information to believe Access has been defrauded of hundreds of millions of dollars. Due to the credible allegations, Access suspended payments to those providers. For years, these providers have allegedly defrauded Access and have created a humanitarian crisis which disproportionately targets our tribal communities. The providers allegedly target the most vulnerable people, offering them false promises. Meanwhile, the providers are not providing the services or treatment and are fraudulently billing Medicaid. The scope of people affected and to be displaced are in the thousands. While Solari, Access, CBI, Mercy Care, NAC, and Navajo Nations are coordinating care for those affected, what is the COC doing to support access to homeless housing services and that the victims have equitable access to Maricopa County Homeless Services System? Jess, do you have any additions to add?
No additions. I wrote it down because I didn't want to forget anything.
Awesome. Thank you. And comment, Co-Chair Phillips, do you have any additions to add? I think we are working in partnership with all of these other partners to ensure that there is equitable access, but definitely something we can also bring up with coordinated entry to say, is there something to?
I don't have any. You gave a comprehensive answer, Katie. Thank you.
Okay, so when you say we're working with coordinated entry, what does that look like? It just is because there's access points that are, working with the folks that are coming in. I guess I'm just I'd love to know what that looks like.
I think right now coordinated entry isn't. And so ensuring that there is access through coordinated entry points and making sure coordinated entry committee, if there is a conversation for prioritization change or anything like that, that they're having that conversation. We as an organization at MAG have been working in partnership with all of these other partners as to how to best direct people. What does that communication look like? We've been working with the governor's office as well as to what communication looks like so that we make sure folks are getting connected to 211 since there's a mass push effort through 211 right now.
And so I guess, I was doing a little bit of research as well when it looks at our COC manual, our prioritization manual, and it's under racial equity. There's just a little blurb that says that we're going to rely on the work group to, get that going. And there's not really anything there. So more than ever, this is an opportunity for us to revisit. And if there's anything NAC or myself can do to help that, we're here.
Thank you, Jessica. All right, we'll move on to the next agenda item.
Are we allowed to
Next
wait?
agenda item. Oh, any additional comments?
Yes, I thank you very much. I just wanted to say, I'm with the city of Mesa. And I'm really sorry for what has been happening. It is incredibly unfortunate. Our police department has been very active in Mesa about this issue and has been part of the solution for the state to be able to come forward the way that they are with the evidence that they need. But I also know, and there aren't any, official or decisions made, but the city of Tucson reached out to the Valley and to all the city managers in and around the Valley and asked for some assistance. Phoenix, probably not because of everything that they're working on with the zone and the housing issues that they have. But the rest of the cities and towns are looking at trying to help by setting aside some and paying for some hotel rooms for these families. And so I just want to let you know that from a migration perspective that is happening. And but I also wanted to say I'm sorry about this other issue and that we're being very diligent about it in Mesa.
Thank you, Natalie. Much appreciated. I guess I should also just say, we're working closely with CBI and Solari, and it's a pretty robust system that we've worked out in the short time that we've really been working on it. But NAC does have a really good amount of beds available for both in and outpatient treatment. So if you're connecting them with Solari, and we're telling them every day our bed count. So there is some resources available, which is nice. We just need to think of the long term as well.
Madam Chair, do you mind if I also jump in real quick?
No,
I
please
just,
do.
I want to let everybody know that our staff is in, if not daily, at least multiple times a week, conversations with the governor's office about this because they fully recognize that the homeless system is already under incredible pressure, and to have a significant number of individuals who may be coming into the system at the same time could also cause havoc. And so we have been trying our best to identify and work with 211 and the partners at Solari to make sure that everybody's on the same page. There are no easy solutions to this, unfortunately. And the funding is also complicated, right? To try to help people who may have a home someplace else get transportation, to identify who, all the different resources that may or may not be on the table. So we are available to you if you have any additional questions on this issue. And I think it's the information, the resources, the problem is changing every day. Also, thank you.
Thank you. Our next item is the approval of the consent agenda, items 3A through 3D. Does any member of the board have any questions, comments, or request a presentation on any of these items? Does any member of the public wish to comment on any items on the consent agenda? Okay. May I have a motion to approve consent agenda items 3A through 3D?
This is Rachel, so moved.
May I have a second?
Mike Hughes, second.
Thank you, Rachel and Mike Hughes. Is there any discussion of the motion from the board? Are there any comments from the public? We will take a voice vote. Those in favor, please say yay. Those opposed, please say nay.
Yay.
The motion passes. We will move to our next item on the agenda. Be talking about updates. Just a quick reminder that updates for all committees were included in the COC newsletter and can be found on the MAG website. During the legislative session, we will continue to hear updates on the legislative activity. With that, I'd like to welcome Dylan Belmont, Human Services Planner with MAG, to provide an overview of legislative activity.
Thank you, Co-Chair Phillips. So big news is that the budget passed a few weeks ago, and $230 million was allocated to housing and homeless services. That's kind of big picture. Included in that $150 million deposit into the Housing Trust Fund, and then $60 million to a homeless and shelter service fund administered by ADOH. A few other line item allocations to addressing veteran homelessness, mobile home relocation, and a few more. Another thing to consider, a big focus this session was attempts to expand or extend the low-income housing tax credit. Unfortunately, nothing came to be with that, primarily because a lot of the budget conversations were focused on those one-time deposits. And this, of course, being a recurring tax credit, just wasn't necessarily the appetite for it. So discussions are starting to see how those efforts can be expanded upon next session. That's basically it for now. Session isn't formally adjourned at this point. They are planning to return around mid-June to sort of tie up a few loose ends. One of those being relevant to housing as well with zoning reform. So yeah, more to come on that end, but that's all I have. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dylan. Do any members of the board have any questions for Dylan?
Dylan, this is Mike Hughes. From your perspective, were there any surprises or any stuff that jumped out at you that is worth noting?
I mean, arguably the entirety of what I said was a surprise. I think like it is a really big deal that there's that much funding allocated to it. The investment to the Housing Trust Fund is a bigger investment than there has been in the past. So overall, it's a really positive outcome for this field.
Thank you. Any additional comments from the public? All right. In addition to legislative activity, the governor has also announced the Interagency Council on Housing and Homelessness, which is reconvening. As part of that, the governor would like a representative from each of the 3 COC staff and the lived experience seat from each of the 3 COCs from the board. We anticipate this announcement to be made in the coming weeks. And when this happens, we will be looking for feedback from you all on the work that's being done in the council. Is that?
Board members have any questions on that?
Madam Chair, not so much a question, but just a request, like maybe we could have updates from that council at our regular COC meetings, if that's possible.
Thank you. All right, moving on. Next item up is board co-chair. We received interest from Rachel Milne to be co-chair. Does any member of the board have any questions or comments before we vote to elect Rachel as co-chair? No? Very good then. Can I have a motion to approve Rachel?
Madam Chair, I move that motion.
Chris, I second it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you very much for Chris. Is there any discussion on the motion from the board? Any comments from the public? All right,
I'll say a comment. I just think we're lucky to have her in the room.
agreed. All right, we'll take a voice vote. Rachel, I will ask you to abstain from the vote. Those in favor, please say yay.
Yay.
All right, the motion passes. Congratulations, Rachel. I'm excited to have someone join me as chair. Yay. We will move on from this point to our next agenda item. Next up, we're going to talk about the homeless trends report. Cleo Warner, Human Services Planner with MAG, will provide an overview of the homelessness trends report. Cleo, the floor is yours.
Thank you. All right, so we are looking at the report from the first quarter of 2023, January through March. As a reminder, all the information and data that you see on here is coming from our homelessness management information system, otherwise known as HMIS, unless it's noted on the report. So if I could just get to the top of the report. Thank you. Okay. So the first graph we see here is our actively homeless households. Keep in mind those numbers are households, not individuals. In the narrative next to the graphs, you can see the individual numbers there. And we see a somewhat steady number from January to February before it significantly increases in March. That increase largely driven by the singles number. We did see the increase in families, but as you can see on the graph, much more subtle compared to singles. And then within singles, we also primarily see this increase coming from our unsheltered households. Scrolling down to this new to system graph, these are households that are experiencing homelessness for the first time. Following our overall increases, we see huge increases in this metric as well. Looking at positive exits, these are people who are leaving the system and moving into permanent housing on their own. Overall, we're seeing a drop this quarter compared to last quarter, but you can see we had that nice little slight increase to March. On the second page, you're going to get a snapshot of demographics for heads of households. These numbers really don't shift a bunch quarter to quarter. So if you go back and look at previous trends reports, you're going to see a lot of consistency here. Scrolling down to the comparison to Maricopa County section, this is where it pulls in data outside of HMIS. You'll see census data, so you can kind of start doing demographic comparisons to what we see in the county overall versus what we're seeing in HMIS, and you can start to understand a bit of disparities that are happening. In our next page, we have, again, households broken down into subpopulations. Families were where we saw a pretty steady number this quarter compared to our other subpopulations, with a decrease in 21% since its peak in March 2022. So that's still a nice thing to remember amid all these other increases. When we look at our older adults, 62 plus individuals, we're seeing a 31% increase since March of 2022 and a 5% increase since the end of last quarter. So this number, as you can tell with that trend line, has just been continuing to grow. With youth, we saw a 15% increase since last quarter, so another significant jump there, a smaller increase with our veteran population, and then our chronically homeless population at the very bottom, 12% increase this quarter, and that's compared to a 33% increase since March of 2022. So pretty significant climbs there. All right, our last page looks a little different than the previous quarter. Very exciting. So before, if you might remember, or if you haven't seen the report presentations before, I guess even better, but we used to have 6 boxes that went over system performance information to sort of track the changes from last quarter and where we were in comparison to our goals. It was pretty confusing and not pleasant to just go over in a presentation format or for anyone to look at. So there has been a lot of work on the back end to create an amazing dashboard for our system performance measures that you can access on our website. The link there is live, so when you pull up the report, you'll be able to just click right to it. But basically, it's a way to track these 7 system performance measures over time and sort of interact with the data in a way that makes more sense than just those boxes that were showing up on this report on a quarterly basis. So really encourage everyone to go to the website to check that out. And if you have any questions about it, please let us know. The goal is to make it as readable and understandable as possible. So then the last part of the report is our snapshot of clients served by program types. So basically just another way of looking at some of our data. This is like what program is serving who, basically. So you'll get the comparison you get this quarter and a comparison to last year and previous quarter. We had 6 new projects come online this quarter, which is great. That was 5 compared to 5 new projects the previous quarter. So it's really great to get more action in our system. And if anyone has any questions, you can let us know.
Any questions from the board?
Well, the numbers, of course, have increased. And the question, from a MAG staff point of view, what kind of, for lack of a better way of asking, what kind of blowback are you getting? And, or if any, in terms of the numbers being so significantly increased?
I would say that.
I mean, are people understanding, what we're facing, or what?
I think it depends if the individual works in homelessness or not,
Yeah.
or if they're familiar with the number of individuals or the amount of funding available. The general public, for the most part, when we hear from them, they are not happy.
I will share though, I think it is being noticed, and it is not just being noticed by the public, but the historical investment in the Housing Trust Fund shows that we need to be doing more, and funding is a piece of that. It's not the only piece, but it is a piece of it. One of the things that the communications work group has been talking about is how do we better educate the public and have conversations so that they're speaking the same language as folks who work in the system, and how do we say that this is not something that just the homeless response system can solve. We all need to be working together to address it from a system perspective.
I have a question. If you could pull up that last slide on the data, number of new projects, just in terms of so what's the pool that you're drawing that information from? How do you get that information? And the reason I'm asking, let's say there's a smaller program and they open up 10 beds. Is that going to show up here? How do you track that?
So, Katie, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe these are projects that are opening in HMIS. And then we also have a note down here that as of, I think it was, the last quarter of 2022, we do have non-HMIS data included where available for things like emergency shelters and safe havens. So it is hard to track down that stuff sometimes, but we really are just relying on who is entering their programs in HMIS. One of the goals of data committee is to further bring in those folks who are not in HMIS, because anybody who has a shelter that is included in the housing inventory count should be in HMIS unless you are a domestic violence program. So their goal is to further reach out to those folks, make sure we're getting them enrolled in HMIS. We do have a pretty high success rate of getting folks into HMIS. Our coverage rate, our lowest coverage is specifically around domestic violence shelters.
Kitty, I have a question. How are we identifying those organizations or entities that are not currently in HMIS? And then how are we, what's our approach?
Combination, and Clea, I'll even throw this back over to you. Through the housing inventory count, we're required to gather as much information that we know about shelters. So the majority of the shelters that are not covered, I think all but like 2 are domestic violence shelters. And so they cannot enter into HMIS. And we're working through data sharing through a domestic violence work group with coordinated entry to make sure those folks are still getting through coordinated entry and we're coordinating their care. But I would say a lot of it is like word of mouth, hearing about their shelters and then reaching out to them to make sure that we're getting them connected.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Just one last question. Maybe this is for Dylan or for staff or, obviously a lot of money is going into housing and that homeless, and that's great. But has there been a similar infusion of all the other things that, for your point, the common person who just thinks it's housing, it's a lot more than that. It's the workforce, it's the counseling, it's the substance abuse, it's all these other things that if it's not all aligned or in place, housing's not going to be the only answer. And so I was curious from a funding perspective, do you feel that those additional services were aligned with what they gave housing?
I mean, certainly at least with the 60 million to the homeless and shelter services fund with ADOH, there is a lot of flexibility with that, where providers, there aren't a lot of earmarks that have certain stipulations with what to do with that money. So that could certainly play into it. I think does that answer your question?
I'll also say we spend quite a bit of time on our staff chasing down stories that are reported incorrectly in the media, or stories that are reported with a really negative slant and don't really show all the hard work of everybody in this room, in this community. And so our comms team and our team are regularly trying to do interviews to say, but look at what, yes, this is increasing, but look at all the people that we've housed in the last year and look at all the success rates we're having, et cetera, to try to tamper down anger, I would say, and also to try to just hold the press to be more accountable to the good that's happening also.
Can I have it go back? It has to do on the 60 million. So the 20 is out and that'll be that's for cities and municipalities. It's due this Friday. And then the other 40, because that has to be this fiscal year and it'll last for a year. The other 40, I don't know if they're going to do listening sessions. As you said, it was left pretty loose. That wasn't necessarily what everybody wanted. They wanted it to be sure to be tied to homelessness. So some of us were in some conversations. I don't know if it's appropriate for COCs to weigh in if they do any kind of listening sessions or if they don't at ADOH, or if that's too political for people to look at, because it is really broad. And so just raising a question and to see what other folks think about that.
I would highly encourage you all to weigh into what you all think is the best way to spend that money. That is, I would encourage you to listen to what your organization and agency says that you're able to do. I think what we have consistently said is we have 120 plus people, no, 200 plus people across 100 plus organizations involved in the COC. So I don't know if the COC will take a stance on any of that, but do really encourage you all to, and we will be providing information as we know that it is available for those listening sessions.
And one of the reasons I raised it, I know is it the data committee? There's a matrix and Excel spreadsheet that has open beds at 6 or 7 agencies. And I know there's been talk for a long time about let's bring it into this century and do some technology. So it seems to me that would be a great thing to be funded. And so those are the kind of things I wonder, is it appropriate for a COC to weigh in? This is a high priority. If this board were to say these committees have these recommendations, including something that can make the system more efficient, that's the kind of thing. So if it's not something that's appropriate for a COC to weigh in, then I understand that. I'm just raising it because I do worry that the funding without everybody's voices, without some coordination, is maybe not going to go to things that many of us are hoping for.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say to Katie's point earlier, I think that's where from an organizational standpoint, you weigh in on things that you have the ability to do. So I think from the data standpoint, Lisa, which is a good point, I think that's something we, from a MAG standpoint, we might be able to look at and help shape the higher level.
I think that, Lisa, what you were referring to is a shelter occupancy dashboard, and that is moving forward without funding needed. So that's kind of a separate conversation that has been working through the pipeline of committees as through the process in which it goes through. And we actually just met right before this on that. So it's moving through the emergency shelter work group back to data committee, and then eventually we'll come to you all as the board. So I think that is kind of separate and in addition to this funding of 40 million.
Are you saying there's funding to do a system? Or the technology system? Is that what you're saying?
I think there's probably some multiple layers of conversation happening here, but I think that an occupancy dashboard is in the process of figuring out the nuances of that within our current avenues. And I don't think at this point we're looking for additional funding to be able to create that. We're in the process of creating it with our current funding levels.
All right, thank you very much. May I have a motion to, if there's no further discussion, may I have a motion to approve the homelessness trends report?
This is Rachel, so moved.
May I have a second?
Seconded, Lisa.
Rachel and Lisa, thank you very much. The motion has passed. Is there any discussion, the motion from the board? All right, any comments from the public?
Wait, I'm sorry. I thought of something. I just want to say thank you to Cleo for making that adjustment with the 7 different boxes. I can't wait to see it online. I know it's going to be a huge improvement because I always would get frustrated with those boxes and not understanding them. So thank you.
It was by no means my directive. So thank you to the team for doing it. I'm just happy I don't have to walk through them anymore with all of you.
I have to tell you, I was reviewing the dashboard and it was the ease of use and the data. It really was a clear picture. And, if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, it's really snazzy. Nice.
It's the responsibility also of the committee to review that dashboard on a quarterly basis. So they are really the ones who are owning and catering that through. So that goes to them in March, June, September and December, 3, 6, 9, 12. And so if you are interested in being part of those discussions, you are more than welcome to come to the committee meeting next month.
Thank you, Katie. All right, are there any comments from the public on this? All right, we will take a voice vote. Those in favor, please say yay. Yay. Those opposed, please say nay. Great, the motion passes. Thank you, and we will move on to our next agenda item. Next up, we're going to talk about performance standards. Dylan Belmont will provide an overview of the proposed performance standards and values.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Oh, God. Sorry, I have a PowerPoint. It's going to go on the screen. Okay. Performance standards is something that may be familiar to you all. The concept was brought to the board and has been through a few other committees earlier this year. But basically, this is, a tool that helps sort of just give more information to providers as to what, performance looks like. Essentially, this tool, as it's developed, is going to bring forth these data benchmarks for common metrics that providers use to evaluate their own effectiveness, which in turn hopefully leads to being able to notice any red flags if a provider's performance isn't matching what is like a system-wide average. So what this would look like in theory is, a provider takes a look at, their programs overall average length of stay for clients, right? And if it's much higher than what's in these performance standards, what's seen as the system-wide average, then that might point out, hey, maybe this is an area of opportunity where we can look at how to sort of adjust that. For the purpose of this meeting and why we're bringing it for you today, it's probably easiest to look at this broken down into two parts. The first being the criteria that's being evaluated. This is what theoretically it would look like. We'll probably change the visuals before it goes final, but essentially you just have all of the criteria, what's being measured, as well as some fun categorization. These were brought to the board back in February and were approved, but primarily these criteria focused on, relevance, making sure that what's being judged is actually mattering to providers, right? It's things that we all look at and think about in terms of effectiveness. Also wanted to make sure it's feasible to actually pull these elements, not just saying that we want to improve this with it being pretty vague and not really understanding what it could look like. And lastly, we want the criteria to be impactful and to have these things actually result in change. So for that, a lot of these are aligned with system performance measures. They're either aligned with directly or feed into in some larger way. Might be easiest to think about, those 7 system performance measures are really big and broad, and these criteria sort of break them down further into what are those, minute changes that could eventually lead to a difference. Other aspect, kind of the main purpose of today's discussion after this overview are the metrics themselves. Taking those criteria and then pulling for, each program type, what those benchmarks are. Just a few things I want to mention with this data. First of all, being the source, the various sources used for all of these numbers, the vast majority are from HMIS, their weighted system averages. However, that's not the case for all of them. If you can see in the bottom right corner, no HMIS fields will result in green. That's just not a number. So there are other sources like best practices, the community adopted best practices that were developed that this pulls from. Green in particular is from the Housing First Assessment tool that is developed by HUD. So, ta-da. Next, categories. Obviously, it's not fair to compare, what a transitional housing program looks like compared to permanent supportive housing. So they're all broken down, not just by program type, but also for singles and family programs. And then lastly, with this data out here, obviously it only makes sense if where they come from is pulled in the same way. So everything here, these averages were created based on like the same time frame used for system performance measures. And truthfully, a lot of the calculations used to get to these metrics are from the same way as, a lot of what you see here from the COC, either system performance measures or the NOFO scorecard. And then lastly, just wanted to add one thing that's, I guess, relatively new. Part of the criteria, we wanted it to be as clear and obvious as possible. That way it's actually useful to providers and it's not just a bunch of words and numbers. So in addition to all of those metrics and criteria, it's a really lengthy definitions page that'll go along with it, that in great detail, so there's like no room for error, explain all of those. And of course, the priorities for that being clarity and clarity. And clarity. Great. So that's it for the overview. I do have a few targeted questions I'd love to ask, but before I do, wanted to open it up to see if there's any general feedback or comments. This was included in the agenda packet.
No questions from the board? Are there any questions from the public?
I just have a comment. I think it's very helpful. Very, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, that's super nice to hear. Like, we want to make it as beneficial as possible. So some of the different aspects to do so is really just going to be ease of use for providers getting this information. So, you know, what the standards themselves are will be posted on our website and easily accessible in PDF format, while the other aspect would be, you know, how providers are pulling their own information. We didn't want it to be something where they would have to individually take all of these metrics from HMIS. So there will be, you know, a standardized report that has all of these criteria, and they'll be able to like directly compare one-to-one.
All right, thank you. The standards will come back in June for final approval. With that, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Charter Review Work Group. Each year, the board identifies an ad hoc group who will review the charter and obtain feedback from the committees on membership, recruitment, membership structure, and their roles and responsibilities. The ad hoc group will bring changes back to the board for review. We anticipate the work group will meet twice in June before bringing recommendations to the board. Do board members have any questions about the work group? May I have 3 to 4 people who would like to volunteer to participate in the work group? Cricket?
Meetings will be virtual.
I recommend new members. It's a great way to learn about it, having done that myself.
So we have Cricket. Anyone else? I think we're lacking a few additional people.
Okay, I'll volunteer.
Very good, Jessica. Thank you very much. As 3 to 4 people, I think we have 2 right now. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, Katie. We will work to get the work group scheduled with you all. With that, I move on to our next agenda item. The next item is a request for future items. Do board members have any action or discussion for future meetings? All right. Well, thank you very much. Again, I would just like to take an opportunity right now to welcome the new members. That's outstanding. Welcome, all of you. Also like to recognize Rachel as the co-chair. That's outstanding. Excited. Thank you, Cleo, for the homelessness trends report. And thank you, Dylan, for the performance standards. All right, for the next agenda item, comments from the board. Is there anyone on the board that has any other announcements or events that they would like to highlight?
Just a really quick comment. I think this last month has proven that we are our housing response is very fragile at this point. Our human services response is very fragile at this point. Between the expiration of Title 42 and the real stress that's put on providers, along with the trends going up in homelessness, along with the new access response to the fraud, all of this is compounding and does not make it easy for any of us in this field to be able to respond and be able to respond well. And so I think that there needs, while we can throw money at things, I think we also need to identify that the system itself needs to really become a little more proactive and as much as we can. And again, we all have compliance issues. We all have funding requirements and funding restrictions. And it's not until these crises happen that sometimes those things get addressed and sometimes never do get addressed until we get to the next crisis. So I think it's just another example of how fragile this really is, and especially how systems work well together under crisis. But in the same time, we need to continue to plan because there are more crises ahead. I hate to tell us all that. So just thoughts.
Thank you, Sean. Yes, Cricket.
This is just to go back to the first comment, your public comment, Jessica. I was wondering if it would be possible for Solari to give us updates in the meeting for how many calls they're actually getting in, so we know like where that's landing. It might be a time just to keep us reminded of what's happening there. So maybe that could come in monthly when we meet. Thank you.
Katie, is that something we can reach out to Solari and obtain the data, the number served, number of calls? Perfect. Thank you, Cricket. All right. Any other announcements?
Staff do. We have a series of events upcoming in June. We have a COC office hours, June 14th. An invite will be getting sent out to June 14th. It is June 12th, not the 14th, from 2 to 4 p.m. This is the office hours that was providing a space for people to talk about challenges, things that they want to work on in the continuum of care. I'm hoping board members will attend, but we will also be sending it out to a wider audience. It will be hybrid with an encouragement to attend in person. This is a week sooner than typical. Typically, it's the third Monday of the third month of the quarter, but because of Juneteenth, we are moving it up a week. And then I will throw it over to staff over there to make announcements about other office hour events.
Thank you, Katie. We put it in your packet, but in case you missed it, community adopted best practices office hours are tomorrow at 11. So if you would like to hang out with this space tomorrow, please join. I am requesting that if you do come, please read through the community adopted best practices beforehand and come prepared with comments and feedback. We will also be having a second office hours if you can't make tomorrow on June 8th at 2 p.m. I believe. And we sent out a Gov delivery today as a reminder, and we'll be doing that again for the June meeting if you would like to join. That's all. Thanks.
Are you taking comments any other way? I mean, if some people can't attend that, is there any way they can get information to you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Please feel free to just send me an email with any recommended changes you may have.
Thank you.
Thanks. But if you could do it before, I would say like mid-June, that would be great. Thank you.
We also have our next racial equity partners training for the community at large. Anybody is available to attend. We're really trying to encourage organizations who have frontline staff to encourage their frontline staff to attend. It was initially scheduled for this Friday. We realized scheduling a Friday afternoon training before a 3-day weekend was probably a pretty bad idea. So we pushed it back a week. So now it is scheduled for Friday, June 2nd. It is at 1 p.m. And again, all the information is available on our website on the calendar. It is free to enroll. We will be filming it. It will go into the learning management system, although we would really encourage your participation during the live event. There will be opportunity to ask questions, et cetera, as well. Thank you.
All right, with no further business, the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.